Off we go. I'm sorry about the sharing yesterday, by the way. We had all kinds of Wi-Fi problems. I'm going to have to resolve it before we do Yizka, because I've got a video from Michael, which is playing videos in Zoom is a nightmare to figure that one out. Okay, which is annoying. I don't know if they do that on purpose to stop you. Well, they probably don't do it on purpose. Okay, right. So, Nitzavim Vayelech. Iris? Oh.
Well, all I've got at the moment is Monday morning.
Sorry?
Reviewing a nation. Renewing a nation.
Just bear with me. Here we go. Got it?
Okay, yes. The Parshat of Nitzavim includes some of the most fundamental principles of the Jewish faith. The unity of Israel. You stand today, all of you, before the Lord your God, your heads, your tribes, your elders, your officers, and every Israelite man, your young ones, your wives, the stranger in your gate, from your wood hewer to your water drawer. The future redemption. Moses warns of the exile and desolation of the land that will result if Israel abandons God's laws. But then he prophesies that in the end, you will return to the Lord your God. If your outcast shall be at the ends of the heavens, from there will the Lord your God gather you and bring you into the land which your fathers have possessed. The practicality of Torah. For the mitzvah which I command you this day is not beyond you, nor is it remote from you. It is not in heaven, it is not across the sea. Rather, it is very close to you, in your mouth, in your heart, that you may do it. Freedom of choice. I have set before you life and goodness, and death and evil. In that I command you this day to love God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments. Life and death I have set before you, blessing and curse, and you shall choose life.
That was just the first Parsha Nitzavim. Here we go with Vayelech. By the way, these are very short Parshas. You've probably got almost the entire content here just in these paragraphs. Right, carry on.
The Parsha of Vayelech, and he went, recounts the events of Moses' last day of earthly life. I'm 120 years old today, he says to the people, and I can no longer go forth and come in. He transfers the leadership to Joshua and writes, or concludes writing, the Torah in a scroll which he entrusts to the Levites for safekeeping in the Ark of the Covenant. The mitzvah of Hachel, gather, is given. Every 7 years, during the festival of Sukkot of the first year of the Shemitah cycle, the entire people of Israel, men, women, and children, should gather at the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, where the king should read to them from the Torah. Vayelech concludes with the prediction that the people of Israel will turn away from their covenant with God, causing him to hide his face from them, but also with the promise that the words of the Torah shall not be forgotten out of the mouths of their descendants.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, we're going to have, so that's loads of things going on. A very short Parsha. It makes you wonder why some Parshas with less themes are much longer. But anyway, there we go. Right, now, let's have a look at a very famous line, which we all know. Who would like to read number 2? Maybe in Hebrew and English, possibly. Anyone says? Pam, or Julian? Mark?
Yeah, I'll do it. When Moses charged us with the teaching as the heritage of the congregation of Jacob.
Right, and Hebrew there, which you all know, Torah Tzivah on the Moshe, Morashah Kilas Yaakov. It's one of the first lines one teaches a child. Right, that Moshe commanded us the Torah, gave us the Torah, commanded us literally, and it's a heritage of the congregation of Jacob. Okay, we're going to have a little math. Right. The gematria, right, is numeric values of things. We've got to do a bit of maths here. So, the word Torah. Anyone any good at gematria here, or should I just tell you? I'll tell you. Toph is 400, Vov is 6, Resh is 200, and Hey is 5. Who's good at maths? Anyone want to add that up?
611.
Right, 611. What number does that sound like?
Too short.
Mitzvahs?
Right. Too short of
613.
Right. By the way, my sound's okay. Is anyone else having problems with sounds?
Terrible.
Terrible. Yeah, not good.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mine's okay on the phone.
Oh,
That's interesting.
we're not doing it so much now, is it? We were getting a phone signal come up, like a not a signal.
I think you'll find that's me, Brenda.
Yeah.
Because I'm on the phone, but I think my computer keeps trying to connect me, because I'm also getting one of the small pictures
That's it.
with my telephone number and a picture of a green
Yes, that's what happened.
circle with a
Yes.
phone.
Yeah. It has
So
to
I
happen
think that's my
Okay.
computer trying to connect me still.
Okay. Is that any better? I've turned my speakers off because sometimes you get feedback. Is that any better?
I think it might be.
Yeah.
Right, that might be the problem. Okay, we'll see. We'll see how we go. Okay, so we've got this phrase, Torah Tibalonu. Okay, so Torah is gematria of 611, as Julian quite correctly pointed out. I think Julian, somebody. 613 is the number of mitzvot. So if you want to be all clever, if Torah has a value of 611, what happened to the other two? Any ideas? Let's see what the Talmud.
They were the first two that were given to on the mountain.
Yes? Who just said that?
Beryl.
Beryl.
Oh, Beryl, sorry, I didn't see that was you. Absolutely. Let's see what the Talmud has to say. I think you're right. Okay. 1 second. Oh, come on. Right, here we go. Okay. Yep. Well, Beryl, would you like to read that, being that
Oh,
you
no,
basically
I'd
got the
rather
answer?
not read. Thank you very
No?
much.
Okay,
I'm not-
Mark, you read already. Jeff or Brenda, would you like to read?
I'll read if you like.
Right.
Rabbi Simla taught there were 613 mitzvot stated to Moses in the Torah, consisting of 365 prohibitions corresponding to the number of days in the solar year, and 248 positive mitzvot corresponding to the number of persons' limbs. Rav Hamnuna said, what is the verse that alludes to this? It is written, Moses commanded to us the Torah, an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob, Deuteronomy. The word Torah, in terms of its numerical value, matria, is 611, the number of mitzvot that were received and taught by Moses, our teacher. In addition, there are two mitzvot, I am the Lord your God, and you shall have no other gods. The first two of the 10 commandments that we heard from the mouth of the Almighty for a total of 613.
Right, so full mark to Beryl, right? 613 mitzvot. Says Torah Tzivalon and Moshe. Moshe gave us 611, the value of Torah. Why? Because the first two came directly from God. Okay, that's what the Talmud says. Nice. Fits with all the maths. We all like to do gematria and add things up. Here's another thought, thanks to Rabbi Sachs. The other way you could look at it is that the first 611 mitzvot are quite specific, and then we have two very, very general ones. Anyone know what the last two mitzvahs are? I think we might have discussed them in the summary. Anybody know?
No.
So the very last mitzvah in the Torah, you ever heard this one? Do you know what the very last mitzvah in the Torah is? The last commandment?
No.
At least chronologically. You probably have heard this before, but probably not for a very long time. If you've ever been to a Siyum Sefer Torah where they celebrate the writing of a new Sefer Torah, they probably told you that the last mitzvah in the Torah is to write a Torah. The very last mitzvah in the Torah is to write the words of this song. From that, we take that to mean to write a Torah scroll. And when they were trying to persuade you to buy a letter in that Torah, they probably told you, quite rightly, if you can't write your own Torah, the next best thing is to buy one, commission someone else to do it on your behalf, right? Just like most of us don't circumcise our sons, we ask the Moel to do it on our behalf as our agent. Agency is valid in Torah. So the same thing here, you don't write your own Torah, you make someone else your agent to do it. How do you do that? By putting some money in the pot. Right? Most people can't afford a Torah scroll. So what do? A community bands together. When your kids were little, you might have seen various campaigns to buy a letter and a Torah scroll. It's a beautiful idea that you have a share. The other thing about it is that when a community gets Sefer Torah, if it's actually been paid for by the entire community, it has a certain communal feeling as well. Excuse me. So the very last mitzvah in the Torah is to write a Torah. The one
No,
before that, sorry?
Can I ask a question on this?
Yeah?
How are we expected to remember the whole 613? I mean, would the Orthodox Jewish people know them all? But I mean, you've got a very good memory to remember 613. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay, let me put you on the spot, Mark. Do
Yes.
do you even know? Never
Yes.
mind. Do you remember all the
Yes.
laws of this country?
Nope.
No.
Right.
No.
In fact, I don't know if it's really true or not. That look, if you go to Dubai and you drink alcohol in public, you can end up in prison, right? So you're going to
Right.
turn around and say, wait a minute, in England you're allowed to drink alcohol. And they're going to say, maybe, but in our country you're not. And if you go to Iran and you're female and you don't cover up, you'll get arrested. And you're going to say, I'm foreign, I didn't know the law. And they're going to say, we don't care. It's your business to know the law. It's one of the peculiarities of any legal system, including British law, that ignorance of the law is no defense, right?
Right.
Might be a claim of mitigation, right? So if my parents never taught me about tax, and I never learned about it in school, and by the way, you don't. If anyone follows Martin Lewis, the money saving expert, he talks about this a lot, financial education. You could get to age 18, go through school, you never learn anything about tax, right? And you start up a business selling, I don't know, whatever, lemonade, and you honestly have no clue that you have an obligation to pay income tax. Why would you? No one told you. You certainly don't know about VAT. Why would you? Right? You're just running a little shop out of your home. You honestly have no idea. And you get raided by HMRC, and they're going to say to you, you owe all this tax. And you'll say, I didn't know. I never. They'll say, that's no excuse. It's your business to know. And you'll say, how am I supposed to know? How am I supposed to know that, I don't know, it's illegal to drink alcohol in an open container in the street? Actually, they have signs up sometimes for that. You know, how am I supposed to know that it's illegal to do this or to do that? So if you're a driver and you get stopped by the police and they say, so did you realize that you didn't indicate? You say, oh, I didn't know you're supposed to. They say, yes, you do, because it's in the highway code and you have driving lessons. There's a test you have to pass, right? If you're a doctor, you make a mistake, you'll be held to a set of professional regulations. But as a citizen walking down the street, it's basically pot luck whether you know the law or not. You don't have citizenship classes, only for foreigners that want to become naturalized. So it's one of the peculiarities of any legal system that often you don't even know half the laws until you break them and then you suddenly get prosecuted, right? Jewish law, unfortunately, sadly, is the same thing. Most Jews are not familiar with all of the laws of the Torah. Interestingly, though, Mark, ignorance is a defense in Jewish law.
Oh, right. Right.
So if I did not know, because no one ever taught me, that you're not allowed to mix meat and milk, and I mix meat and milk, and then I find out that it's forbidden, and I go to the rabbi in a panic saying, I feel terrible, I broke the rules. He's going to say to me, did you know? Say, no, I didn't know, I wasn't raised that way. Well, it's not your fault, you're not culpable. So Judaism views it differently. But you raise a very good point. How are we supposed to know all the mitzvot? Well, that's why we have the Torah written down. We're not expected to know all the mitzvot. We have them written down. The truth is a large number of them are to do with animal sacrifice and things. But you're right. It's a very big discussion. But even somebody who can go through a very orthodox school or yeshiva for years and years and years, many people in yeshiva learn Talmud all day. They don't necessarily learn practical halakha. How can you not learn practical halakha? Boys in yeshiva certainly don't learn the laws of kashrut. Why not? How are you supposed to have a kosher kitchen? It's mad. So the short answer is you raise a very good point.
Right.
In Judaism, ignorance would be a defense, but nonetheless, that's why we learn. We learn. We try to educate ourselves. Look, if you learn Chumash every week and you learn the Parsha and you learn some various commentaries where it says, you know, a number of Chumashim will tell you, the Gutnik Chumash, for example, is a nice one, which we've got, says for each Parsha, there are 25 mitzvahs in this Parsha, and here's what they are. Or some people learn the Sefer Mitzvot every day from the Rambam. So there are various ways of certainly having a general overview of what the 613 commandments are. But you're right, often ignorance is a big issue. We all learn new things. I learned something new, which I didn't know, which is that according to the order of making brachas, if you have in front of you two things that are both 7 species of the land of Israel, and you don't know which one to make a bracha on first, you go by the order in which they appear in the Torah. The wheat is first. Well, I did know that because you make them as not first. But I didn't realize that was why. So if you have dates and figs, you make a bracha on whichever one comes first in the Torah. I didn't know that. I learned something new this week. We all learn new things.
Oh, right. Okay, thank you.
But it's a good question. And that's why we have to constantly learn. And we have to learn relevant things as well. So the last 2 mitzvahs, the last mitzvah is to write a Torah scroll. The penultimate mitzvah is something called Hakel. Does anyone know what Hakel is?
Is that the one where the king has to read the Torah?
It certainly is. Full marks again. Let's have a look. Okay, who wants to read? Pam and Julian, would you like to read?
Yeah, it's just that our sound is very poor
Oh, yes.
today. At the end, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. At the end of every 7 years, in the year for cancelling debts, during the Festival of Tabernacles, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, you shall read this Torah before them in their hearing. Assemble the people, men, women, and children, and the strangers in your towns, so they can listen and learn to revere the Lord your God and follow carefully all the words of this Torah. Their children who do not know shall hear it and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land you are crossing the Jordan to possess.
Okay, this is the Mitzvah Hakel. In the year after Shemitah, so the 8th year, or the first year of the new cycle, after Sukkot, when everyone's in Israel, the king would gather, they would gather, and the king would read the whole Torah. I think he'd read the book of Devarim. And by the way, some people have a custom, probably because of this, on Hoshana Rabbah, when the last day of Chol Hamoed Sukkos, people have various customs. One is to stay up all night, Tikkun Leil, some people do it. One is to read the whole book of Devarim. Many years ago when I was a student in Birmingham, Rabbi Rapport, who was later in Beehive Lane, who was able to do this because he was a genius, actually read the whole of Devarim from the Sefer Torah. It took quite a while. Anyway, there's a few interesting aspects to this Hakel. If you were making notes on this, what points would you pick out that stand out from this page here?
When to do it?
Okay, yeah, so it's every 7 years. Yeah, what else?
To do it
The
all.
fact that everybody has to come, men, women, and children, and
Right.
strangers.
Right. Men, women, and children. It doesn't say just the men or the men over bar mitzvah. It says every single person. It says again, the children who do not know should hear it. Right. This is an interesting kind of issue with education, and there are different views on this. We've always, it's one of the peculiarities of Jewish life that we're learning some of the halachas now of what to do if you forget in the mornings, if you forget to say something during Rosh Hashanah, you forget some of the additions, and when you go back, and we're always extremely careful about making a bracha. If we have the slightest doubt, we don't make a bracha because we're using Hashem's name. And yet, if you're teaching children, you can make brachas all day long with Hashem's name because it's educational, right? It's a beautiful thing. You can make brachas. That's not taking God's name in vain. Is there any better use of God's name than to teach a child say bracha? So some people teach their kids. We've always taught our kids from a very young age. So even before they can speak, we've always made brachas with them on food. That way they learn to make brachas. Others would say, no, that's wrong. You wait till they're 2 or they're 3. From here, we see that even the child who doesn't know should hear, right? They get it by osmosis. So yes, every single person, men, women, children. Also, of course, who's the person reading it? The king. The king is not a religious leader, right? You know, when I was in yeshiva in Jerusalem, Ehud Olmert, who later sat in jail, like many Israeli politicians. Anyway, at the time was mayor of Jerusalem. He's not a religious man. I think he was from the Likud. Yeah, but he's not a religious man. Like most Israelis, he has knowledge of Tanakh and so on. And they cancelled our afternoon shir, afternoon seder, so we could go and hear the mayor come and speak in our yeshiva. And I remember some eyebrows were raised about this because, you know, the mayor is a political figure. I think he was like openly ate treif and stuff. Like, what's he coming? Or we're cancelling our yeshiva lessons with rabbis instead to have the mayor address us. This is like very political, and you know, he's a political leader. He's not a religious leader. Now, if your mayor happens to be, I just bought a book by Senator Lieberman, by the way, which looks really interesting about keeping Shabbat. It's a really nice book, The Gift of the Seventh Day or something. Anyway, if it's Joe Lieberman coming to talk to you about how he managed to be a senator and still keep Shabbos, then that's worth closing yeshiva for. But just a regular politician who's a secular leader, you know, by all means have them come in the evening and give a talk about, you know, something neutral, but don't cancel your Torah learning for that. So the king is a political leader, but of course a Jewish king is something very different, because a Jewish king has to be somebody who has fear of God, right? And it didn't always work. We know there were kings who were very bad kings. So there's a lot of aspects to this. So the last 2 minutes of the Torah, you have the Hakel, which is every 7 years. Doesn't take place nowadays. I know that in Chabad circles, I think the Rebbe spoke about the idea that you could still do it in the year after Shemitah, even though we don't do it in Israel. But the idea certainly of gathering children and learning Torah is a good one. And the idea of doing it publicly, I think they're very important. You know, most of you will probably remember a time when your Rav would have probably said to you, don't bring your kids to shul. Never mind toilet training. Don't bring your kids to shul unless they're old enough to sit quietly. They're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Right? Nowadays, people, halavai, everyone bring kids to shul from a younger age. They don't bring them at all. But let's say they did. We'll always say, you know, if you bring them from a young age, they get comfortable. Says it here, the children shall hear it and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land. It doesn't say wait till they're old enough to understand. It says basically they'll get it by osmosis. So there's a few different things. Okay. So that's the Hakel, which is the 612th mitzvah. Like the word kahilah, which is a gathering, a community. Right? Sorry, a community. So the Hakel is a commune, a communing of spirits. And here we've got the last mitzvah. Who hasn't read yet? Or would like to read?
If you like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Therefore, write down this poem and teach it to the people of Israel. Put it in their mouths, in order that this poem may be my witness against the people of Israel.
I don't know what it says against them, by the way. It should be witness testimony to them. Yeah, it's not a great translation. It's from Sfaria. Write down this song, and the song is the Torah, right? So 613 mitzvah is to write down the Torah, that it may be in their mouths. Okay, so we've got the last two mitzvahs. Hakel, which is gathering everyone together, and the king reads the Torah. A few points to take from that. And then we've got this writing of a Sefer Torah. These are quite far-reaching commandments. They're given right at the end, right? They're not given in the desert, or assuming the chronology is correct. Moshe has finished recounting everything that took place. You know, imagine the scene. He's finished telling the story. He's gone through the curses. He says, right, you're all standing here today. And someone says, Moshe, you told us there's 613 mitzvahs, but we've only counted so far 611. He says, okay, I'll give you two more. He says, the first one is that you gather every 7 years and the king reads the entire Torah. And the second one is you write the Torah down. And interestingly, one is communal, the Hakel, and the other is more individual. What do these have in common? Any thoughts on what particular theme these two very powerful mitzvahs have? It's very obvious. And it's mentioned in the Hakel one itself.
To fear the Lord.
Okay.
To fear the Lord your God.
Yeah, but what else?
Canceling debt.
The whole people.
Sorry?
For the whole people.
Right, yes. So the communal nature of it. And so it stretches across.
And to teach it to the children.
Right. So you've got time and space. You've got space as in everybody in the entire world, as it were. And you've got time as in through the generations. Right? It's the theme of continuity. Right? When you assemble together, the place of his choosing, by the way, is the temple, right? When you assemble in the temple, bring the children, bring the men, bring the women. Everyone has a stake in this, but particularly the next generation. They should all hear the Torah. And then you write it down so that it's intact to be passed on to the next generation. So the theme there is continuity, basically. Right? The Torah shouldn't grow old. Each generation should hear it. Each generation should write it. Now, I know it means to write a Sefer Torah, but you could also say it means that each generation should interpret and write the Torah for themselves. So Hakel is the National Assembly, and writing a Sefer Torah really is for individuals. Right? We have, you know, here's a nice question. Is Judaism socialist or not? You know, is it communist? Well, it's not communist, but so the answer is yes and no, like everything, right? On the one hand, on the other hand. So on the one hand, Judaism is very socialist in many things, right? There's many things. I think we just learned with the Bikurim that you couldn't bring the Bikurim until every single person had completed their Bikurim, the whole nation. On the other hand, you have individual responsibilities. Anyone know somewhere that you probably read last week about the sort of juxtaposition of communal individual responsibility? And if you don't know it, you're going to kick yourself when I show you it, because you do know it. I think it's on the walls of most Jewish schools. They like this one. Something that Hillel said.
If I'm not from myself, who that one?
Very good. Here we go. See? Okay. I'll read this one. So Hillel used to say, Im ein ani li mili. It's got a nice...
That's King Solomon's motto.
was it? Oh,
Yes,
sorry,
it's
King Solomon's School. Yes, sorry.
King
I was thinking,
Solomon's School.
yes, yeah,
Motto.
yeah. They've got it on the wall, right? So if I'm not my... it's got a nice rhyme to it. There's a song about it. Im ein ani li mili. Anyway, Im ein ani li mili. If I'm not for myself, who is for me? But, if I am only for myself, ma'ani, what am I? So, which is it? You have to act for yourself. You have to act for self-interest. And then it says, but don't be selfish. So the answer obviously is going to be the medium path, right? The path down the middle. You need to act for yourself. You need to have individuality, but at the same time, you need to have communal responsibility as well. So you have these two mitzvot. The first one is a communal responsibility of gathering together to hear the king. And the second one is an individual responsibility of writing the Torah down. You have both. And the community needs both, right? We don't believe in authoritarian regimes, but we don't believe in complete liberal democracy either. We believe in some kind of a balance, basically, where we have a shared responsibility, a covenant. We also have an individual responsibility as well. Like one of the classic mistakes of Anglo Jewry is that, only the rabbi has to keep Shabbos, or, only the rabbi has to do this or do that, and everyone else doesn't matter because, we're a traditional community. And you have this rather peculiar situation that you had in many Commonwealth countries, which was unheard of in other countries. In America, if you have a young Israel shul, for example, or in OU shul, you might have the full sort of gamut of modern orthodoxy, but people will basically be Shomer Shabbat and to the right of that. You're not likely to have someone who is not Shomer Shabbat who joins an Orthodox shul. Why would they? They don't follow orthodoxy. And yet, of course, in England, in South Africa, in Australia, in Canada, and all these places, we have this concept of traditionalism, where we say, I want to belong to an Orthodox shul, even though I never go. Now, there was a film many years ago, a TV program they made about, I don't remember what it was, but about Orthodox communities. I remember they're talking to a chap at a wedding. He said, he doesn't have a kippah on, this Israeli guy, and he says, I'm not religious. He says, I'm not religious, but thank God for the religious people. If they're not for them, Judaism wouldn't keep going. Right? Very nice. Thanks for the, respect. But actually, you've got the same responsibility as everyone else, right? So in that sense, communal doesn't work. The fact that someone somewhere is holding a flag of Judaism, that's not good enough. I have my own obligation. The fact that the rabbi is sitting and learning doesn't mean the congregation don't need to sit and learn. The fact that we have, a few guys dabbling in shul doesn't excuse everyone else, right? I don't think anyone would argue it does, by the way. I don't think anyone would say, I don't need to go dabbling because there's already a minyan. People simply say, I don't daven. But so we have individual responsibilities, but we have communal ones as well. Right? And also the Hakel, extremely inclusive. Extremely inclusive. Very interesting. Anyone know what the American Declaration of Independence says about rights?
Is it the Third Amendment, if you're talking about?
No, even just the original Declaration of Independence says as follows, and good job on the Americans are here now to hear this. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Question, that was in 1776. Did women get the vote in 1776 in the United States?
Black people.
No.
No.
But it does say men, doesn't it?
Right. Good point. Yeah, and it doesn't say white men, but was slavery abolished in 1776? No. Right?
No.
Look, what's the film? What is it? Gentleman's Agreement. They still had in the 1940s. You had no Jews, blacks, or dogs allowed. So, to me, I've always found it mind blowing that a country that now people will invoke the Constitution in quite rightly in the defense of individual rights managed to exist for 150 years or something like that without having individual rights at all. So they might have paid lip service to it, but in reality, women didn't have rights, slaves didn't have rights, not until much later on. Hakel, everybody's there. The men, the women, the children, the foreigners.
Little clock in here, actually.
Everybody, every single person.
Chinese.
They all have to be there. They're all part of the, society. And the fact that the king is reading, as we said, also was quite radical. In many societies, the head of state was also the head of religion, which you still have kind of in this country, right? There was a reason for that. The head of state was all powerful, but the king didn't have that role in Judaism. The king was actually subservient in many ways. Let's have a look at what it says about appointing a king. Here. Oh, no, that's Hakel again. Sorry. Here we go. Who'd like to read about kings?
I'll read it. I'll read it.
Go on,
Right.
Mark.
When he's seated on his royal throne, he should have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. Let it remain with him.
That's you, by the way, Mark. That's you.
Oh, thank you.
Levitical priest.
Okay.
Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
Thank you. Right. Let it remain with him, and let him read in it all his life, so that he learn to fear the Lord his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, as well as these laws. Thus he will not act haughtily towards his fellows, or deviate from the instructions to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel.
Okay, let's talk about kings for a minute. Who's familiar with Tanakh? Were kings a good idea generally?
Not really.
No, often went quite horribly wrong. So question, why does the Torah have a mitzvah to appoint a king?
Wasn't it that Hashem said that they could have a king? They didn't have to have a king, but they could have the king. But if they did have a king, they had to have certain qualities that the king must achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of them, by the way, having a Torah scroll with him. So there is some debate because the Torah does say, you shall surely appoint for yourself a king, like all the nations around you. So the question is asked, I think it was like 600 years before we actually appointed a king. In the times of Joshua, I think. Or later even. Shoftim, I think it's later. So why did they take so long? So there is one suggestion that if you read the verse quick, what it's actually saying is, if you shall want to appoint a king to be like the nations around you, so it's saying it in a derogatory way. The reason you want to appoint a king is because you want to be like all the other nations. Well, if you're going to do that, so God, here are the restrictions. One of the restrictions is the king has to keep a Torah scroll with him to remind him where his power really comes from. I can't tell you it always worked because there were corrupt kings, but that was the theory. So the scenario where you have a world leader who doesn't, a Dominic Cummings scenario wouldn't happen here because the king has to hold the Torah scroll the whole time. To remind him, he takes it with him. To remind him that where his real power comes from. There's a book called How to Prevent an Intermarriage by Rabbi Kalman someone. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it. It's a small book. It's a very old book. And you'll see how old it is when I tell you what it says in there. So it says, here's an idea to prevent an intermarriage. Take the young man or woman who's about to marry out. I think it's a young man. Take him into a shul. Take the Torah out of the ark. Ask him to hold it. Ask him to throw the Torah on the ground. When he says, of course, I can't do that, it's not respectful. You say to him, but you are throwing the Torah on the ground by marrying outside of the faith. So you may as well just spit on it now. And of course he doesn't, because he's been brought up not to do that. Anyway, I don't think that would work nowadays.
No.
But that's the idea here. The king should have a Torah with him. If you had a Torah with you, you probably would behave differently. The king has to behave himself. He's not above the law. He's not above the law. Very important point.
Can I ask a question then?
Yep.
Rabbi?
Yes, go on.
So there's a king in England, isn't there, obviously, and queen?
Yes.
But there's no king in Israel.
Correct. That would just be too complicated. There's a prime minister. Head of state.
And a president.
Modern democracies, well, to be fair, modern democracies don't tend to appoint kings, do they? They tend to be hereditary. And I don't know of any country in the last couple of hundred years that was formed that had a monarchy. Monarchies tend to be older than that. Is that a fair comment?
Yes, but what happened? Yes, but what happened then? I know I'm going back a long way, but what happened then to the kings of Israel? Why did that
Well, I
cease?
mean, the Romans happened, didn't they?
Yeah, the Romans
And-
happened, and they got themselves in a
And
mess.
before them, other Babylon and people like that happened.
Yeah, so once we were dispersed, there was no monarchy. But even when there was a monarchy, it often got itself into trouble. There were too many kings that were corrupt. You had kings like King
right.
Manasseh or King Jeroboam, who was in the northern territory, who caused idol worship. You know, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. You know, it's very difficult to be a king, right? As Harry learned, yeah, or felt, or whatever, Prince Harry. You know, it's very difficult to be a king. There's a lot of responsibility. Let's have a look at what Maimonides says about the Hakel here. I'll read this. Trumpets were blown throughout Jerusalem to assemble the people, and a high platform made of wood, a bimah basically, was brought and set up in the center of the women's section. Don't know where the women went. The king went up and sat there. Oh, they stayed there probably. So his reading might be heard. The chazan would take a sefer Torah and hand it to the head of the synagogue. Oh, it was a synagogue. I mean, it was in the temple. Anyway, the head of the synagogue would hand it to the deputy high priest, who would hand it to the high priest, and the high priest to the king, to honor him by the service of many persons. The king would read the sections we have mentioned until he would come to the end. Then he would roll up the sefer Torah, say a blessing after the reading, just as it's recited in the shul. Proselytes who did not know Hebrew had to direct their hearts and listen with utmost awe and reverence, just like the day the Torah was given at Sinai. Even great scholars who knew the entire Torah were required to listen with utmost attention. Each had to regard himself as if he had been charged with the Torah now for the first time, as though he had heard it from the mouth of God. For the king was an ambassador proclaiming the words of God. So according to Maimonides, it's a reenactment of the giving of Torah at Mount Sinai. And Moshe alludes to this later on as well, right at the beginning of Devarim. He says, the day you stood before the Lord your God at Chorev, when the Lord said to me, assemble, Hakel, gather the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, that they may learn to revere me as long as they live on earth, and so teach their children. So Moshe uses the word Hakel there when he refers to Mount Sinai. So it seems like a part of this is basically a visual reenactment every 7 years of the giving of the Torah. Yeah? Why do you do this? It's like renewing your vows. We don't have that concept in Judaism. But you need visual stimuli. You need a reminder. You know, the Torah was given on Mount Sinai 2,000 years ago. Okay, very nice. Okay, now unfortunately we only have the memories. But in the times of the temple, you had the Hakel every 7 years. It was a living reminder of the experience of everyone hearing the Torah together. And it was a reenactment. Part of that was in order to keep things fresh and new. You hear the Torah read again. Remember Simchas Torah? You might be thinking that's what we do on Simchas Torah. Simchas Torah, we read the Torah, the end and the beginning. That's a relatively modern phenomenon. Yeah? So Simchas Torah wasn't around in those times. It's a relatively modern phenomenon. But it's the same idea, gathering everyone together and celebrating the Torah. This is what Jeremiah says. Who would like to read number 11? This is from the Yom Tov Davening. You might Zachati
Shall I read again?
Zachati lach. Yeah.
Shall I
Sure.
read again?
Anyone recognize that?
Julian hasn't read yet.
Yes. Anyone? Julian, read. Anyone recognize the Hebrew from the Yom Tov Davening? Haloi v'karaso b'oznei Yerushalayim leimor kayamar adoshem. It's from Yom Tov Davening. That's my attempt at it. Anyway, so yes, the English, off you go. Julian?
Okay.
Yeah.
Go proclaim to Jerusalem. Thus said the Lord, I accounted to your favor the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride. How you followed me in the wilderness, in a land not sown.
Thank you. I'm trying to think.
Is there more?
No, I'm trying to think what the continuation is. It's Haven Yakeli Ephraim. It's the beginning. It's the same part. Okay, so the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride. You followed me in the wilderness in a land not sown. What's the devotion of your youth? What is the devotion of your youth?
To your parents.
When they were in the wilderness, in the desert.
So the devotion of your
When
youth
they were
is
in the
that,
desert.
but it's this fact that we're constantly harking back to Mount Sinai. So every 7 years they have the Hakel. What happened after the Hakel ended? So after the destruction of the temple, it's a later innovation. They started reading the Torah every week. And initially, you may know this, they didn't read it for a year cycle. They read it for a 3-year cycle, which a 3.5 year, I think, which many Reform communities still do. Simchas Torah, as we know it, is I don't know how many centuries ago, but it's not as far back as the destruction of the temple. It's a later innovation. They started reading the Torah. And when they read the Torah, it was a little bit of a reenactment of this. The king would stand on the bimah, right? We stand on the bimah, we read the Torah from the center, and everyone listens, men, women, and children. It's the same idea. There's always an element of historical, what do they call it? Reenactment, right? That we're reenacting the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. The reason, by the way, I think that we normally, in normal times, have somebody either side of the person reading is for that as well. In the same way we had God and the Jewish people and Moshe, you have someone either side as well. Apparently that's why. Oh, that's it. Okay. So the last 2 mitzvahs in the Torah, very general ones, very all-consuming ones. One is the Hakel, which, as we said, is not just gathering people on the 7th year after the Shemitah in the temple. It's the idea of reenacting Matan Torah, possibly even on an annual or daily or weekly basis. So every time we read from the Torah, we're going harking back to these times when the king would read. And the king reading was a harking back to the giving the Torah on Mount Sinai, which is not just a one-time event, it's one that reverberates through the generations. Says Jeremiah, this is the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, that you keep harking back to your youth. You don't forget it, you reenact it constantly. And that's so important. And the writing of a Torah scroll also is so important because it's passing on to the next generation. You know, learning now is something we kind of like, we do on a Shabbos morning. For months, of course, we didn't do it. But it's also probably, besides for reading, we don't really, you know, sometimes people say, non-Jews often ask me, you know, do you read the Torah in English? No, we read it in Hebrew. What's the point? Good question. Most people don't understand it. Part of it is probably this reenactment, this, you know, the Sinai experience, basically, the idea of public Torah readings. In Hebrew, learning is called Kriyat HaTorah. Now, a Kriyah can mean a reading, but it can also mean a calling, a proclaiming. So we're not, when we learn, we're not just reading the words, we're proclaiming the Torah publicly, which again is the same idea. How do you stay young? First of all, you have to reenact history, right? It's not enough to rely on something that happened thousands of years ago. You have to reenact it, whether that's through our learning, for our hakel. And what's the other important thing? The other important thing is you pass it down. How do you pass it down? You have to have a written record. It gets passed on to the next generation. You have to tell them, you have to pass this along. You have to write this down and you have to preserve it, basically. And that's why those are the last 2 mitzvahs in the Torah, because they're all to do with how we remember and how we preserve it and how we pass it on. Right. Any questions?
Something strikes me, Rabbi.
Yes.
When it says you should gather all the people to Jerusalem,
Yeah. Let's go back to that.
it's an impossibility to gather all the people in those days. But with the Zoom and media nowadays, we have more of an opportunity to gather everybody together, not in one place, but to hear one proclamation of the Torah.
Very true. Very true.
So we have a great opportunity now.
Yeah.
To do that, but we're not going to do that on a Yom Tov, are we?
Well, we're not. No, but we've got other opportunities. You're right. Wouldn't it be fascinating to have the rabbis of the Talmud discussing the kind of issues they had in today's, you know, so how do you get a message to people when you spot the new moon? You say, well, you put it on Twitter, right? Does anyone watch Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was, I think it was Sherlock, where there was an episode where he texts everyone mysteriously.
Yes.
Remember that one? So like, that just looks so wrong, because you think of Sherlock Holmes as 1890, whatever it is, you know, but, you know, things move with the times. You know, when Mashiach comes, are we going to have, you know, social media to connect us? Is that what it means when it says the world will be filled with knowledge of God from, you know, one corner to another? This is the you know, the fact that there's infinite knowledge online that anyone can access.